we've got motivation. So firstly, the two types. So we've got positive and negative motivation, extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. There's also anxiety and arousal. So within anxiety and arousal, we're looking at trait and state anxiety, the source of stress, and optimal arousal. And we finally look at psychological strategies to enhance motivation and manage anxiety. So those are like concentration, mental rehearsal, relaxation techniques, and goal setting. So what I'd like you to what I'd like to draw your attention to is the right hand side. So the right hand side column is asking us to look at, firstly, how can we use motivation to evaluate performance scenarios to determine the appropriate forms of motivation. Also explain the difference between anxiety and arousal in terms of effects on performance, and research case studies of athletes from different sports and ascertain the nature of their motivation and the psychological strategies they employ. So today we will just revise anxiety and arousal. We won't have a chance to go through motivation or psychological strategies, but what we'll do is what I'd like us to sort of think about is really with motivation, we want to think about, okay, if someone, for example, if an athlete is worried about their next game, if they're focusing on the next game because they're worried if they don't do well, they will lose their sponsors. They'll lose their sponsors, and also may not they'll lose their sponsors. So with a scenario like that, you can kind of tell that in terms of positive, negative, it's going to be negative. They're scared they're going to lose their let me go back. They're scared that they're going to lose their sponsors, right? And as a result of that, it's going to be negative. And then extrinsic versus intrinsic, well, the worry, this motivation to win, otherwise they'll lose their sponsors, is coming from not their wanting to win or their wanting to not disappoint themselves, but it's coming from a fear that someone else, they'll lose their sponsors. So that is extrinsic. So you kind of just need to sort of think about that. So basically, positive is when the motivation is good, negative when it's not so good, when it's affecting when it's not good, when the not good in the sense, now I'd like to say, when it's more so coming from a negative source too, when it's basically when it's not good. Extrinsic versus intrinsic. Intrinsic is when it's coming from their own desires to succeed or their own fears, versus extrinsic is when it's being affected by outside factors like sponsors and coaches and friends and family. That's extrinsic. Psychological strategies. So with these are quite self-explanatory, right? Concentration and skills. We've right there. So we've got concentration and skills, right? Focusing, how athletes are able to focus before a game. Mental relaxation, visualization, so how athletes can visualize themselves behaving a certain way, performing a certain way in the game and winning, or getting a certain score or getting a certain goal. Relaxation techniques, pretty much the same in terms of for example, writing things down, reading, taking a break, doing yoga, meditation. And finally, goal setting is when they have that goal in their head that they're trying to achieve. So with all of them, you want to have different sports people and know some strategies, different people that use these. For example, Serena Williams writes a lot in her diary during or before a game, and every time that she comes down to sit down and grab a drink, that is when she looks through her diary and tells herself positive affirmations of what she's written in the diary, that you can do this, you'll win, whatever. So that's an example, and there's so many more that you can look at. Okay, moving on. So let's now look at anxiety versus arousal. So with anxiety and arousal, we are looking at, firstly, what is the difference between trait and state anxiety. Trait anxiety refers to is a characteristic of a person. It is it's when they display high levels of anxiety about an upcoming event. So they're always a bit anxious. It's a characteristic. So you can remember trait. For example, right there you can remember trait with characteristic. So you can sort of remember it that way. So that's related to the trait and characteristic of a person. State anxiety, on the other hand, is situational. So state and situation. So anxiety that arises in a situation. For example, when someone's doing a penalty kick, that is a high pressure moment. So they're very they're anxious in that moment, but they're not anxious before the game or after the game. Or they may be anxious a bit before the game, but not like after the game all the time. Sources of stress can be varied. They can include upcoming events. They can include training goals, overcoming an injury, rehabilitation, overcoming new challenges, or consequences of failing. So optimum arousal is a mental state which is required for performance success. So this is the kind of sort of state of mind that you want to be in to give yourself the best chance to succeed. So there are different levels of arousal which are needed for different sports. For example, a low arousal would be optimal for fine motor skills. So that is because in that, like, you don't want to be too aroused, you don't want to be too excited, too ready to go, not too ready to go, but like you can't be like too excited, too jittery and be like full of nerves when you're doing like a fine motor skill where you need to be in control and be calm. That's where the optimum arousal is like really low in comparison to something like demanding sports like triathlon, where you need stamina, where you need to go full in. That's where a high arousal is important. So for high optimum arousal, there's use of pump up music, caffeine, sugar, intense warm up, and also visualization. For low optimum arousal, low optimum arousal, you've got breathing, meditation, mental rehearsal, relaxing music. So this is demonstrated by the inverted U hypothesis. And here is the inverted U hypothesis. So as you can see here, we've got the performance on one hand. So we've got performance here, and we've got arousal over here. Now, arousal, this is the high end of arousal, and this is low arousal. For each of the three sports, we've got shooting, we've got grass hockey, and we've got UFC. You can see that the optimal arousal differs. If you are in shooting, if you're not like if your optimal arousal is too low here, you won't perform as well. But if you are and if you're too aroused as well, over there, same thing. Performance is sacrificed. But if you are just the right amount aroused, you can see that the performance is the best. Like, you can achieve the best performance over there. So that is what the inverted U hypothesis is. That you can't be too you can be you can be too aroused or not aroused at all. Like, you need to have that optimum level of arousal in order to have a shot at the best performance. So for each of the sports, for shooting, it's very low. For shooting, it's very low in comparison to UFC, where you need to be very aroused, where you need to be very excited and pumped up to go.